For Module 6, we are talking about the socio-emotional development in early childhood. This is a personal favorite of mine. I know I said that last in the last module, but these are just really interesting if you will be at any point in your career working with children. As we are going through this lecture, I want you to keep in mind that for our observation for Module 6, you will be interviewing again, but you're going to be interviewing someone or a caretaker who has worked with children's ages 2 to 7. So as we are going through here, I think it would be a great idea. As questions come to you, just jot them out to the side as you're listening to this quick online lecture, and then you will have your 5 questions for your observations. So let's jump into this. Throughout this lecture, we're going to be talking about emotional and personality development, families, peer relations, play, and media and screen time. When we talk about the emotional and personality development of children ages 2 to 7, it's important for us to remember that children are developing their minds and social experiences, and with this, they produce remarkable advances in the development of their self, knowing who they are, their emotional development, being able to identify the emotions that they are feeling and at times express them or control them, and then their moral development, what's right and wrong, and then also gender. On what they are identifying with, what things that they're interested, learning what society is saying about gender. And especially during the second year, there's huge progress in self recognition. They're really figuring out who they are in that second year of life. Erikson's psychosocial stages associated with early childhood specifically is initiative versus guilt, and that is really the idea that they are understanding their purpose, who they are. A lot of times this stage is associated with children ages 3 to 5. But this is a really big stage where children are using perceptual, motor, cognitive, and language skills to make things happen. They have the ability to start to control their world a little bit. And as children, their social world opens up when they go to preschool or maybe daycare. They have more friends. They get to practice these things. When we are looking at specifically the self of a child, they are having an increased awareness of understanding who they are, what feelings that they have. They are beginning to have some self-understanding. They are beginning to have a self-conception of are they a fast runner? Are they a smart kid? Is he a good boy? Is she a pretty girl? And a lot of that is what society is telling them. With physical activities, it's a central component of self in early childhood. Being able to get up and move, being able to kind of test themselves physically and their abilities is a big part of this self. A lot of times they tend to confuse ability and effort. They think that if they can try really hard, they can do it. And so sometimes those two things get muddled. And two things that also get muddled is them kind of thinking that they can do more than they can physically do. And that's a lot of times why they fall down or get hurt, is because they really have the idea that they can do it themselves. I can do it. I can do it. A lot of times you'll hear from them. When when kiddos are understanding others, a lot of times they start perceiving others in terms of psychological traits. So she is nice, he is mean, he is funny. Children begin to develop an understanding for joint commitments, and typically by about their 3rd birthday, they can understand that that person's not just here to entertain and play and give me their toys, that there are things that are a two-way street. Relationships are a two-way street, that I have to be a good friend along with that person being a good friend to me. When we are looking at this growing self-awareness, it is largely linked to feelings, and it's linked to expanding and expressing a range of emotions. As we can see, if you've been around children this age, they experience a wide variety of emotions throughout the day. And this emotional development allows for these children to make sense of other people's emotions and reactions, and then also to be able to control their own. So if they can't identify how they themselves are feeling, it's going to be difficult for them to understand how other people are feeling in certain situations. As they are expressing emotions, typically at this age range, they are can feel pride and shame, embarrassment and guilt. During the early childhood years, pride and guilt become more common, and I think if you really think about that, that makes more sense. Pride, they're meeting a lot of their goals. They're able to complete the puzzle. They're able to climb up the stairs for the slide, and so there's a lot of things to feel pride about. But then also guilt, if they couldn't accomplish something that they really wanted to, or if because they're moving more, if something accidentally breaks, that guilt feeling can come about. These emotions a lot of times are influenced by parents' responses to children's behavior. For example, you should feel bad about biting your sister. So a lot of times those emotions are pulled from their parents. The things that the parents are telling them, if it's positive or negative or encouraging, those comments are building into who the child sees themselves as. As children are understanding their emotions, it's linked to an increase in pro-social behavior. So we want children to be able to understand, identify, and talk about their emotions, because then that will help them to understand others, to be a good friend, to be successful in a kindergarten, first grade, second grade classroom. And being a good friend and having that pro-social behavior is also linked to better academics. They can focus more on learning and exploring and discovering things in the academic world at school. By age 5, most children show the ability to reflect on emotions and growing awareness of the need to manage emotions according to social standards. Now, there are different groups of people in the world where it is okay to express yourself. There's different groups of people where it is more of the social norm to kind of push down your feelings. So when you take in those ethnic diversities that come into this, and then also how do we express ourselves at school? How do we express ourselves at home with mom or dad? All of those things kind of come into a factor there. When we talk about regulating emotions with these kiddos, it plays a key role in children's ability to manage the demands and conflicts they face in interacting with others. So if they think something's funny that could hurt someone else, do they start cracking up, laughing uncontrollably, or can they manage that? Or if someone hurts their feelings and they're angry or sad, do they have an outburst, or can they start to kind of control that a little bit? Parents can be described as taking an emotion coaching or an emotion dismissing approach to help children regulate emotions. It's really important that parents and teachers help children work through their emotions, to talk about it, to give them examples on how to deal with it rather than just to dismiss or ignore. And the ability to modulate emotions benefits children in their relationships with peers. We've talked about that. When you feel this way, this is what I want you to do. That's that emotion coaching type role. When we talk about moral development, this involves the thoughts, the feelings, and behavior regarding rules and conventions about what people should do in their interactions with other people. A lot of times, feelings of anxiety and guilt are central to the account of moral development. So a lot of times these kiddos will feel anxiety because they will be mad about something, or they will be kind of scared about something. Did I get in trouble? Did I do the wrong thing? Sometimes they'll feel guilt. I shouldn't have done that. And so just even when kiddos make mistakes, we still want to talk through all of these processes so they can begin to identify and label how they're feeling, and then also what to do with those feelings, because emotions and guilt can motivate behavior, and it can go several different ways. With moral reasoning, we can see the first stage of moral development in Piaget's theory occurs from about 4 to 7 years old. We can also see that older children become aware that rules and laws are created by people, and that's kind of a big thing for that age group. We can also see that at this older age range, when judging an action, one should consider the actor's intentions as well as the consequences. About this age, they can kind of see, breaking a rule is okay if it doesn't hurt anybody. And so that's just something to think about if you're going to be going into a classroom with this age group of students. It's just a normal moral development way of thinking. The idea of when a child breaks something, a lot of times they think immediately that a punishment or a consequence is going to happen. So a lot of times when a child does something wrong, they will look around, they will look worried, they will try to hide. A lot of times as a classroom teacher, I wouldn't see the infraction, but I would see them looking in a certain way, and I could know, they did something that they shouldn't have done. Parent-child relations in which parents have the power and children do not are less likely to advance moral reasoning. That's really important. Same thing with the classroom. If a parent just lays down the law, they don't discuss it, they don't talk about it, this moral reasoning is going to be less likely to grow, and they are going to be less likely to understand why you're asking them to do certain things, and then it's going to affect classroom management. As we continue on here, we can see that moral behavior is influenced by certain situations. Students or kiddos might act one way at a soccer or basketball practice. They might act one way at school or church or grandma's. I know that my son right now is 6, almost 7 years old, and he acts completely different at school, at home, and at sports practice, and at piano, as he does at church. There's all kinds of different situations that influences how he behaves. Cognitive factors are important in the child's development of self-control. So this growing cognitive ability is also producing the ability for self-control, moral reasoning, all of those things. Let's jump into gender here. Typically, science tells us that gender identity is acquired most of the time by about 2.5 years old. Gender role is a cultural set of expectations that prescribes how females or males should think or act. And a lot of times this is represented in the toys that we buy children, or their clothes, the comments that we make to kids. Oh, you're so pretty. She's so pretty. He's so smart. Entertainment, if you look through Disney, Nickelodeon, PBS, what shows or entertainment sources are pushed to girls or boys or both, and what is that entertainment telling them? And just family and societal expectations is all part of this gender typing. Parental influences can have a lot to do with gender. We can see that mother's socialization strategies for daughters is to be obedient. Father's socialization strategies for sons is to engage in activities that promote intellectual development. So even right there, that's a little bit differently. Peer influences, preschoolers prefer socializing with the same gender. Boys typically tend to socialize in larger groups, and typically boys tend to be more competitive, girls tend to have more conversations, and that is something interesting that if you even look around on a playground, something that you can see. When we are talking about parenting, parents compared to non-parents, parents are typically more satisfied with their lives. They feel relatively better on a daily basis. They have more positive feelings toward children and daily activities. And a recent study shows that half of fathers and a quarter of mothers report feeling they're not spending enough time with their children. And so there's a lot of different emotions and feelings that can go into parenting. But overall, most parents report being very satisfied with their families and children and their lives in that aspect. We can see that parenting styles can come in 4 different ways. We have the authoritarian, the authoritative, neglectful, and indulgent. So the authoritarian parent, they are allowing very little verbal exchange. They're very punitive. They are associated with children's social incompetence. They're linked to child's higher level of aggression. So this is very, I am the king of the castle, I tell you what to do, and you listen. We don't have to conversate, I'm the boss. Authoritative parenting encourages children to be independent but still places limits and controls on their actions. There's a lot of verbal give and take, discussing why we're doing it this way, why this rule has been created. And it's associated with children's social competence, and these type of children are definitely more pro-social. This encourages independence. When we looked at neglectful parenting, typically parents in this type of parenting is uninvolved in their child's lives. It's associated with children's social incompetence and lack of self-control. They really feel like that their children do not have the ability to behave in public. Children externalize problems when they are being parented in a neglectful way. Indulgent parenting, parents are highly involved with their children but place few demands or controls on them, associated with children's social incompetence and lack of self-control again, associated with children not respecting others. So you can see that neglectful and indulgent, a lot of the outcomes are the same. They've just kind of hit both ends of the scale here. Parenting styles. Some important things. Authoritative parenting conveys the most benefits to the child and to the family as a whole. Parenting is reciprocal socialization. Children socialize parents and parents socialize children. As a parent, I can see that. I agree with that completely. Consistent parenting is recommended. However, flexibility in style is warranted depending on the situation. So let's say as a parent, I said, we're going to do it this way. Let me explain to you why. And it doesn't work out. Be flexible. Say, you know what? Maybe that wasn't the best idea. Let's try doing things a little bit differently. When we look at punishment in parenting, we can see that 26 report of American parents report spanking their kiddos. 67% report yelling frequently. Corporal punishment, though, is linked to higher level of child's behavioral problems, higher levels of aggression, higher incidence of intimate partner violence as adults, and sometimes a fear of parent. The best way to handle misbehavior is by reasoning with child and explaining consequences. Talking to your kids is really important. One of these things that we can see with one of our parenting styles is child maltreatment. Types of this is physical abuse, child neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. You can see there that about a third of parents who are abused themselves when they were young go on to abuse their own children. And you might have heard of certain cycles that we try to break or we try to get out of. Poor emotion regulation, attachment problems, poor peer relations, and difficulty adapting to school and depression can be a consequence of abuse. Engaging in violent behavior and substance abuse is more likely as these children who have been abused grow in age. And often they engage more frequently in violent romantic relationships, delinquency, sexual risk-taking, and substance abuse. So it is not something that's just happening to a child at that point in time. It will affect them for the rest of their lives. When we talk about families, of course, we're going to talk about sibling relationships and birth order. 80% of Americans have siblings, which I thought was pretty interesting. Um, and we can see that sibling relationships have some important characteristics. Emotional quality of the relationship is how intense the emotions are between siblings. Familiarity and intimacy of the relationship, is it positive or is it negative? And then there's also variation in sibling relationships. Is there more love, more irritation, a combination of both? We can also see the birth order, um, as you've read in your text, that a lot of times, a lot of our birth order conceptions are misconceptions. That they said that a lot of the ways that we think, oh, the firstborn is always this and middle child's always this, a lot of times there's no grounding for that. Working parents, more than one of every 2 U.S. mothers with a child under the age of 5 is in the workforce. 2/3 of mothers, so that would be 2 out of 3 mothers, children 6 to 17 are in the workforce. Children of working mothers engage in less gender stereotyping and have more egalitarian views of gender than do children of non working mothers. And we can see here that if you look at the percentage of single parent families with children under 18, the U.S. has definitely the most. It's estimated that 40% of children will experience divorce in their lifetime, which is a pretty high number, and the U.S. is leading the way in how many percentage of children under the age of 18 has experienced divorce. Children in divorced families show poor adjustment than their counterparts. There's new research that shows that during childhood it was linked to worse cohabiting material relationships from 16 to 30. And so things that also affect this is their socioeconomic status at birth, their experiences of childhood sexual abuse. Parental divorce and child maltreatment is linked to midlife suicidal ideation. And so all of these things are affecting, that can happen at a very young age, are affecting people throughout their whole entire lives. We can see that co-parenting after divorce, though, helps children to adjust. It reduces anxiety and depression and increases self-esteem and academic performance. So even though you have a child that comes from a divorced home, co-parenting can really help with these students. I'm really glad that the textbook, including the idea of gay and lesbian parents compared to heterosexual parents, and I wanted to point out there that few differences between children growing up in homosexual families, and there's no differences in peer relationships and mental health adjustment for those students that are being parented in those homes. Changing family in a changing society. We have a good deal of lower socioeconomic status parents. These parents are more concerned that their children conform to society's expectations, as in regards to maybe higher SES parents. So our lower SES parents are bringing less money in annually than our higher ones. And these lower ones are more concerned that their kiddos are conforming to society, that their home is an atmosphere where there's clear authoritative parents and then children who is just going to listen to them. They use more physical punishment and they are more directive and less conversational. Now, when we flip to higher SES parents, we can see that they're more concerned with developing children's initiative and delay of gratification, which is different than the lower SES parents. They're less likely to use physical punishment, and they're creating a home atmosphere where there's a lot more talk, a lot more equal participation about rules. And they're less directive and more conversational. And so that's just something to think about when students come into your classrooms, how their homes can be being built, and it helps us understand those kiddos a little bit more. When we look at peer relations and a lot of times are experienced through school for this first time. If they're in preschool or going into kindergarten, they're making new friends. These friends and these relationships are a huge source of information. A lot of kids will learn things from their friends at school. Peer relationships give children information and comparison about the world outside their family. Oh, you go to bed at this time, I go to bed at this time. Or you do this on Saturdays, or you live in a house, I live in an apartment, those type of things. Good peer relations are necessary for normal socio-emotional development. And we can see that parents' lifestyle decisions determine their children's friend choices. Um, and so how their parents are parenting. They can be discussing with them how to be a good friend, what a bully is, how to avoid drama, and those type of things. Play is really important for these kiddos ages 2 to 7. It helps them work off frustrations. It helps them develop language. And children have less unconstructed play time, and they need more time for play for development. And a lot of times when kiddos are getting into maybe that 5, 6, 7-year-old range, they're having less time to play, to free play, because of their time spent at school. The connected worlds of parent, child, and peer relationships. Parents influence children's peer relationships directly and indirectly. If you think about different play groups that their parents might be putting them in, if they're going to daycare, if they're working, if they're getting signed up for camps or allowed to go to sleepovers, all of those things are influencing the child's peer relationships. And we can see several different types of plays here. We have our sensory motor play that Piaget described. A lot of times our infants, so our younger kids in this stage, derive pleasure from exercising their existing sensory motor schemas. So touching, smelling, tasting, licking, looking, all of those things, they are exploring the world around them. Another type of play is practice that involves repetition of behavior when new skills are being learned. Think about a kid will do a puzzle over and over and over. Pretense or symbolic is transforming the physical environment into symbols. You give a kid a box and it's a car, it's a house, it's a jet plane. The social type of play involves interaction with peers. They're having conversations, they're turn taking, they're making up rules. Constructive play combines sensory motor practice with symbolic representation. And so they are creating imaginative worlds around them, and they're creating roles for people to play. And then as kids get a little bit older, of course, we have games, and these are just activities that are engaged in for pleasure and that they have rules. When we look at play, sometimes the opposite side is television and screen time. Television strongly influences children's development. Children also use other medias, and a lot of times this is just all lumped together and called something called screen time, and that is TVs, DVDs, computers, video games, mobile devices, all of those. Young children's use of mobile devices dramatically increased from 2011 to 2013, and that is playing games on apps, watching videos, and now kiddos can watch videos. Same with adults, but we watch videos not just at home. It's on our phone, it's in the elevator, it's in the car waiting for parent pickup, those type of things. When we look at how much TV a child should be watching a day, we can see that many 2 to 4-year-olds spend 2 to 4 hours a day watching TV, and that's more time than they're spending with their parents. The American Academy of Pediatrics tells us that 2 to 5 year olds should watch a maximum of 1 hour per day. And TVs can teach our kiddos a bunch of really great things, but what is even more important than that is having them interact with their friends and build those social relationships. And the last thing here, we can see media and screen time, the best types of educational apps parents can purchase for children. There's active involvement. They're just not staring at a screen. Of course, they're engaged. It's meaningful and social interaction, but that should not replace the interaction that they have with their friends and family. I hope that you guys learned a bit more about the socio-emotional development in early childhood. I hope that you guys got your 5 questions completed, so you can just roll that on over to your observation. I was really impressed with our last observations and hope that you guys really got to connect what you read, what we talked about with an interview, and really applied the knowledge that you got out of Module 4 into your interviews, and you have the ability to do that again this week.